My fiancé leaned across the table, laughed softly, and whispered, "My ex never made me feel cheap like this." The restaurant noise faded instantly. The clink of glasses, the low hum of conversation, the soft music in the background. All of it disappeared, leaving only those words hanging between us. I took a slow sip of water. Understood. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't argue. I didn't ask him to repeat himself. I didn't even look angry. On the outside, I stayed calm, almost detached, but inside, something cracked so cleanly it scared me. I stood up, excused myself quietly, and walked away from the table. I didn't go to the bathroom. I didn't come back. Hours later, while he was still sitting there waiting, checking his phone, convincing himself I was just being dramatic, he finally realized something had shifted in a way he couldn't undo. I'm 31 years old, 3 years into what I thought was a solid, loving relationship, engaged, living together, planning a future that felt real and earned. I believed we were building something steady, something adult, something that didn't need to prove itself through money or appearances. That one sentence told me everything I needed to know. Not about dinner, not about the price of an entree, but about how he saw me, about how easily he could compare me to someone from his past, about how comfortable he was humiliating me quietly, in public, then waiting for me to apologize for feeling hurt. So I left, and that choice set off a chain of events he never saw coming. Because sometimes the most powerful response isn't confrontation, it's absence. And sometimes walking away from the table is the moment you finally sit down with yourself. I was 31 when I met him, and at the time, I honestly thought I had my life figured out. Not perfect, not flashy, but steady. I worked in IT support, a decent job that paid the bills and let me plan ahead. I wasn't rich, but I was responsible. I saved every month. I thought carefully before spending. I believed that building a future meant patience, not shortcuts. We met through mutual friends at a birthday party. Loud music, crowded apartment, cheap wine in plastic cups. He walked in late, confident, smiling like he belonged anywhere he stood. When our eyes met, he didn't hesitate. He introduced himself like we were already supposed to know each other. We talked most of the night. He was charming, funny, effortlessly social, the kind of man who could make people laugh without trying. When he focused on you, you felt chosen, seen, special. I fell for that faster than I want to admit. We started dating not long after. Within months, it felt natural to be together. He was spontaneous. I was grounded. He brought excitement into my routines. I brought structure into his chaos, or at least that's how I saw it. After a year, we moved in together. It felt like a milestone, like proof we were serious. Our apartment wasn't big, but it was ours. We built rituals, grocery runs on Sundays, date nights on Thursdays, takeout and movies when work was exhausting. It felt like real life, not just romance. He proposed 6 months ago. Nothing dramatic, no crowd, just us. A ring he said he'd saved for, and a quiet speech about choosing me, about building a future together. I said yes without hesitation. I believed him. I believed us. Wedding planning started soon after. We talked about keeping things reasonable. We wanted to save for a house afterward. That mattered to both of us, or so I thought. Looking back, there were signs I ignored. He loved expensive things, nice restaurants, designer clothes, trips that stretched budgets. I told myself it was just taste, not values. When I suggested free or low-cost activities, he'd agree. But sometimes I'd catch disappointment flash across his face before he masked it. He talked about his ex more than I was comfortable with. Not constantly, not obsessively, just often enough. Stories about trips they took, the car he drove, the apartment they lived in. Always framed casually, always with a tone I told myself was nostalgia, not longing. I didn't want to be insecure. I didn't want to compare myself. I believed love meant trust. So when he forgot his wallet at dinner, I laughed it off. When he suggested pricier plans, I adjusted budgets. When he said, "It's not a big deal," I believed him. I thought compromise meant bending a little. I didn't realize how often I was the one bending. By the time we got engaged, I was already quietly carrying more emotional weight than I admitted to myself. Still, I believed the commitment meant something, that choosing each other meant choosing respect. That Thursday night at the restaurant wasn't a random incident. It was the first time he said out loud what I had been feeling underneath everything else. And once I heard it, I couldn't unhear it. After the engagement, the tone of our relationship shifted in ways that were subtle enough to dismiss, but persistent enough to leave a mark. It wasn't fights. It wasn't shouting or obvious conflict. It was a series of small moments that made me pause, then immediately talk myself out of pausing. Money became one of those quiet fault lines. He never outright demanded expensive things, but there was always an expectation hovering in the air. When we went out, he rarely looked at prices, and when I did, he noticed. Not with anger, with something closer to judgment, a look that said, "Why are you thinking about that?" If I suggested something simple, a walk, a free event, a casual dinner at home, he'd agree, but the enthusiasm drained from his voice. "Sure," he'd say, stretching the word just enough to make it sound like a compromise instead of a choice. I started compensating without realizing it, picking nicer places than I wanted to, ordering appetizers I didn't really crave, telling myself it was fine, that relationships were about give and take. What I didn't see was how rarely he was the one giving. He talked about his ex in ways that lingered too long, not in a bitter way, in a polished way. Stories about how spontaneous they were, the trips they took, the restaurants they loved, the apartment they lived in, the car he drove, always the lifestyle first, the emotions second. "She loved nice things," he'd say, like it was a neutral fact. I told myself it was just comparison in my head, that I was projecting, that he chose me. Then there were the moments that stung just a little too much to ignore. The time he joked in front of friends that I was practical to a fault. The time he laughed and said, "You're so serious about money," like it was a flaw I needed to outgrow. The way he'd roll his eyes playfully when I mentioned saving for the future, like adulthood was something I was doing at him instead of with him. I started feeling like I was auditioning for approval I'd already earned. I noticed how often I adjusted my behavior to avoid disappointing him, how I softened my opinions, how I swallowed discomfort to keep the peace. I told myself this was what compromise looked like in a long-term relationship. But compromise shouldn't feel like erasing yourself. By the time that Thursday date night came around, the tension had already been building. Date nights were my idea, a way to stay connected, to remind ourselves that amidst work and wedding planning, we still mattered to each other. I wanted that night to feel special, normal, reassuring. Instead, it became the moment everything he'd been implying quietly was finally said out loud. And once it was, there was no pretending it was just about dinner anymore. That Thursday night is burned into my memory in a way I didn't expect something so ordinary to be. Thursdays were our date nights. My rule. I wanted one evening a week that belonged only to us. No work stress, no wedding logistics, no distractions. Just time. That night, I'd made reservations at a small Italian restaurant downtown. Not flashy, not cheap either. The kind of place you take someone you care about because it feels warm, intentional. We sat across from each other, menus open. I remember the smell of garlic and bread drifting from the kitchen. He was debating between two pasta dishes, going back and forth like it was a playful decision. I smiled, leaned back, relaxed. For a moment, everything felt normal again. The waiter came by. I ordered an appetizer to share, bruschetta, because he loved it. He smiled at that. Then he looked at the menu again and said he wanted the lobster ravioli. I glanced at the price, $48. That was it. Just a glance. A second, maybe two. Not judgment, not refusal. Just mental math. Adjusting the budget in my head like I always did. I didn't say anything. I smiled and told the waiter that sounded great. But something changed in his expression. It was subtle, a tightening around the mouth, a flicker of something sharp in his eyes. After the waiter walked away, he leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. His voice dropped, almost playful, like he was sharing a joke. "My ex never made me feel cheap like this." The words landed softly, casually, precisely where they would hurt the most. I didn't react right away. I placed my water glass back on the table slowly, carefully, like I was afraid it might shatter if I moved too fast. My hands were steady, but my chest felt hollow, like all the air had been pulled out at once. Cheap, compared, dismissed, all because I paused for 2 seconds. I looked at him, really looked at him, and in that moment I understood something with frightening clarity. This wasn't about dinner. This was about power, about testing me, about punishing me for not performing the role he wanted me to play. I met his eyes and said one word, "Understood." He blinked, clearly expecting something else, an apology, an explanation, a promise to do better. Instead, I stood up, pulled my wallet out, and placed 3 $20 bills on the table, enough to cover the appetizer, his water, and the tip. "Excuse me for a moment," I said calmly. I walked away. I didn't go to the bathroom. I didn't pace the hallway. I walked straight out the side exit and into the cool night air. I sat in my car for 5 minutes, hands gripping the steering wheel, heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. My phone buzzed almost immediately. I turned it off. Then I drove. I drove across town without music, without checking directions, without really knowing where I was going. My hands stayed tight on the steering wheel, my jaw locked, my thoughts moving faster than the traffic lights I barely noticed. I didn't go home. I went to my best friend's place. She opened the door, looking confused, then one look at my face and stepped aside without asking questions. She grabbed 2 beers from the fridge, handed me one, and waited. That's when the shock finally started to thaw. She compared me to her ex, I said quietly, at dinner, because I hesitated for 2 seconds over a menu price. My friend shook her head slowly. That's not a joke. That's cruelty. It wasn't about the money, I said. It was about the way she wanted to make me feel small, like I needed to prove something. I stayed there that night. I didn't turn my phone back on. I didn't want explanations. I didn't want damage control. I needed silence more than anything. The next morning, I turned my phone on. 47 missed calls, over 60 text messages. The first ones were confused. Where did you go? Is this a joke? Please come back. Then they turned angry. You embarrassed me. You're so immature. How could you just leave me there? Then they turned panicked. Please answer. I'm worried. Can we please talk? Some messages were from her best friend. 2 were from her mother. I didn't read every word. I didn't need to. The pattern was clear. Confusion, anger, fear. Not once did I see accountability. I called my sister instead. She lives 2 states away, but we talk all the time. When I told her what happened, she didn't hesitate. Oh, honey, she said softly. That's not okay. What she said was deliberately cruel. I keep wondering if I overreacted, I admitted. You didn't, she replied. She insulted you in public, then expected you to stay and absorb it. That's not a joke. That's a boundary violation. That word stuck with me. Boundary. I went to work that Friday like nothing had happened. I answered tickets, reset passwords, sat in meetings. My phone buzzed constantly in my pocket, but I ignored it. At lunch, I sent one message. I need space. Please don't contact me for a few days. She responded instantly. We need to talk face to face. You can't just run away. I didn't respond. That weekend, I stayed with my friend again. Saturday afternoon, there was a knock at the door. Her best friend. Somehow she'd tracked down the address. My friend answered while I stayed in the guest room. She's devastated, her friend said. She made a stupid comment. Did she tell you what she said? My friend asked. There was a pause. It was about dinner, her friend replied carefully. That's not the whole story, my friend said. She'll reach out when she's ready. I heard the door close. Through the wall, I heard her friend on the phone saying, she's being completely unreasonable. That night, I finally went back to our apartment. I texted ahead to make sure she wouldn't be there. She was staying with her mother. The place felt colder, different. I packed essentials into 2 suitcases. Clothes, laptop, documents. I left the engagement ring on the kitchen counter with a note. I'm staying elsewhere for now. We'll talk when I'm ready. I locked the door behind me and felt something heavy shift in my chest. I wasn't exploding. I wasn't dramatic. I was choosing myself. I thought asking for space would slow things down. It did the opposite. By Monday morning, the tone shifted from panic to pursuit. Messages stopped sounding worried and started sounding entitled, like my silence was something she needed to correct. She didn't respect the boundary. She tested it. I was at work, in the middle of helping a coworker reset a locked account, when the receptionist called my desk. Her voice was hesitant. There's someone here to see you? She says it's urgent. I knew before I even stood up. She was waiting in the lobby when I walked out. Jeans. My favorite cream-colored sweater of hers. Hair done. Eyes red. Like she'd practiced crying but hadn't fully committed yet. When she saw me, her face collapsed. Can we please talk? She said. Just 5 minutes. Everyone was watching. The receptionist, 2 coworkers. I felt cornered. Outside, I said. We stood in the parking lot, the hum of traffic filling the silence between us. She was shivering, though it wasn't cold. I'm so sorry, she started immediately. I wasn't thinking. It was a stupid comment. I was joking, and it came out wrong. I looked at her, really looked at her. You compared me to your ex, I said calmly, because I paused for 2 seconds over a $48 entree while we're saving for a wedding. That's not what I meant, she said quickly. I don't think you're cheap. I love you. I want to marry you. Do you? I asked. Because it sounds like you want the lifestyle your ex gave you. And I'm not him. I will never be him. She grabbed my arm. I don't want him. He was flashy and shallow. What we have is real. What we had, I corrected, and real things don't come with quiet humiliation. She cried harder, apologized again, promised it would never happen again. And then she minimized it. It was just one comment, she said. People say stupid things sometimes. There it was. Not reflection, not accountability, reduction. It's not about one comment, I said. It's about what that comment revealed, about what you value, about how you see me. I went back inside. She stayed in the parking lot. I watched from the window as she sat in her car for 20 minutes before finally driving away. That night, her mother called. I almost didn't answer. I raised her better than this, her mother said immediately. What she said was disrespectful. I was surprised, relieved. But then she added, you also need to understand that walking out on her, refusing to communicate, that's not how you handle things in a marriage. We're not married, I said, and I asked for space. That is communication. She's heartbroken, her mother said. She made a mistake. Don't you think you're being a bit harsh? No, I said simply. I don't. There was a long pause. Then she sighed. I hope you find someone who appreciates you, truly. That conversation stayed with me, because even when people meant well, the pressure was clear. Forgive, fix, minimize, move on. But something in me had already shifted. I wasn't reacting anymore. I was deciding. Once the noise died down, once the calls slowed and the explanations ran out, the quiet became unbearable. I moved into a small, month-to-month studio after a few nights on my friend's couch. It wasn't much. Bare walls, a mattress on the floor, a folding table that served as both desk and kitchen counter. But it was mine, and that mattered more than comfort. The first few nights there were the hardest. I'd come home from work, drop my keys into a bowl I bought for $5, and sit on the edge of the bed fully dressed, staring at nothing. My body felt exhausted, but my mind wouldn't shut off. Every memory replayed itself without asking permission. The restaurant, the pause, the whisper, the word cheap. I kept wondering how something so small could fracture everything so completely. I replayed the scene over and over, searching for a version where I stayed, where I laughed it off, where I apologized, where I proved something. That's when the darkest thought crept in. Maybe if I had just handled it differently. Maybe if I'd ordered dessert. Maybe if I'd joked back. Maybe if I'd reassured her faster. That thought scared me more than the breakup itself, because it meant I was still trying to earn respect from someone who had already shown me she didn't see me as an equal. I stopped sleeping through the night. I'd wake up around 3 a.m. with my heart racing, my chest tight, like I'd missed something important. Sometimes I reached for my phone without realizing it, thumb hovering over her name before I caught myself. I missed her, and I hated myself for missing her. I missed the routine, the familiarity, the way she'd curl her feet under mine on the couch, the way she'd steal my hoodies, the way we'd plan imaginary futures on lazy Sunday mornings. But every time nostalgia tried to soften the edges, another memory would surface to balance it. The eye roll when I suggested a budget, the sigh when I chose a simpler option, the way I always ended up justifying myself. One night, I opened the drawer where I'd tossed the engagement ring before leaving the apartment. I hadn't sold it, I hadn't returned it, I hadn't even really looked at it since that night. I held it between my fingers, the weight of it heavier than it should have been. This ring was supposed to mean certainty, partnership, respect. Instead, it felt like evidence. Evidence of how hard I'd tried to make something work that required me to shrink to fit. I thought about the future I almost married into, the unspoken expectations, the subtle tests, the feeling that love had to be proven through spending, through sacrifice, through silence. And for the first time since everything happened, I asked myself a different question. Not why did she say that, but why did I stay so long before that? That realization hit hard. I wasn't just grieving the relationship. I was grieving the version of myself who didn't trust her instincts. The woman who thought discomfort was normal, who thought love meant endurance, who thought respect would come if she just proved she was worth it. I sat on the floor of that studio apartment, back against the wall, knees pulled to my chest, and let myself feel it all. The sadness, the anger, the embarrassment. The relief I didn't want to admit was there, because underneath everything else, there was relief. Relief that I didn't marry into this. Relief that the comment came before vows. Relief that the mask slipped early enough for me to walk away with my future intact. That scared me too, because if relief existed alongside grief, it meant leaving had been the right decision. And accepting that meant I couldn't go back. Not for comfort, not for familiarity, not for apologies. That night was the lowest point, not because I wanted her back, but because I finally understood something painful and permanent. Even if she never said another cruel word again, even if she apologized perfectly, even if she changed, I would always remember how easily she tried to make me feel small, and that memory would live between us forever. When I lay down that night, for the first time in weeks, I didn't reach for my phone. I didn't draft a message I wouldn't send. I didn't rehearse a conversation in my head. I just stared at the ceiling and whispered something I hadn't said out loud yet. I deserve better than this. And once I said it, I knew there was no unsaying it. The shift didn't happen all at once. It came quietly, in pieces, as I started paying attention to how my body reacted when I imagined different futures. When I pictured going back, my chest tightened. My shoulders crept up toward my ears. My breath got shallow. Even in the fantasy where she apologized perfectly, where she never compared me to anyone again, my body stayed tense, like it knew something my heart was still negotiating. When I pictured staying gone, the fear was there, yes, but underneath it, there was space. That realization changed everything. A week after the coffee shop conversation, she reached out again, not with pleading this time, with reflection. She told me she was seeing a therapist twice a week, that they were talking about her relationship with money, with status, with her ex. She said she finally understood why that comment came out the way it did, that she had been testing me, subconsciously, trying to prove to herself that she was worth it by how much I'd spend. I believed her. That was the hardest part. Her explanation made sense. It was thoughtful, self-aware, painfully honest. And a few weeks earlier, it might have pulled me back in. I could see the version of us where we went to therapy together, unpacked the patterns, tried to rebuild. But clarity had already settled in. I asked myself one question and didn't let myself dodge it. If nothing else ever went wrong, could I forget how she made me feel that night? The answer was no. Not because I wanted to punish her, not because I was holding a grudge, but because trust doesn't just break when someone cheats or lies. It breaks when someone shows you how they see you under pressure. She had shown me that when she felt insecure, she reached for comparison, for humiliation, for power. And I knew myself well enough to know I would always be listening for that edge again, always wondering if the respect was conditional, always bracing for the next test. I couldn't build a marriage on that. So when she asked to meet one last time, face to face, I agreed. Not to reconcile, to close the door properly. We met at a quiet coffee shop downtown, neutral ground. She was already there when I arrived, sitting at a corner table, hands wrapped around a cup she hadn't touched. She looked hopeful, careful, like she was afraid of saying the wrong thing. "I'm really glad you came," she said softly. "I wanted to be clear," I replied. She nodded, took a breath, and told me everything she'd been working through. How her ex had equated love with spending. How she learned to measure her worth by how much someone was willing to give up for her. How she realized she'd tried to provoke reassurance instead of asking for it. "I know it's not an excuse," she said, eyes glossy, "but I understand now. I want to be better. For you. For us." I listened. I didn't interrupt. I let her finish. When she finally looked at me, waiting, I felt calm in a way I hadn't in months. "I believe you're doing the work," I said honestly, "and I think that's good." Relief flickered across her face. "But I don't think we should get married," I continued. Her face fell. "I don't trust you anymore," I said gently, "and I don't know if I ever will. You didn't just hurt my feelings. You showed me a value system that doesn't align with mine." She reached for my hand. I didn't pull away, but I didn't hold on either. "I can't be the person you practice on while you figure this out," I said. "I need a partner who respects me without testing me." She cried. She told me she loved me. She asked if love counted for anything. "It does," I said. "Just not enough to outweigh respect." When we stood up to leave, there was no drama, no raised voices, just the quiet understanding that something had ended because it needed to. As I walked out into the morning light, I felt something unexpected. Not victory, relief. For the first time, I wasn't wondering if I was being too sensitive. I wasn't replaying conversations to see where I could have been better. I wasn't waiting for permission to trust myself. I had it, and that was the turning point. The aftermath didn't explode. It seeped. Once I made it clear that I wasn't coming back, the messages didn't stop immediately. They changed shape. Apologies turned into explanations. Explanations turned into frustration. Frustration turned into silence, punctuated by the occasional late-night text that said more by what it didn't say than what it did. I didn't respond. Not because I was trying to be cold, but because every response reopened a door I had already closed with intention. I had learned, painfully, that clarity loses its power when you keep negotiating it. Her friends were less subtle. Indirect posts started popping up on social media. Quotes about people who run instead of fighting for love. Comments about how everyone makes mistakes. I recognized the tone immediately. It wasn't about growth. It was about rewriting the story so no one had to sit with discomfort. I blocked where I needed to, muted the rest. The engagement ended quietly, without an announcement or a dramatic reveal. People figured it out on their own. Invitations stopped being mentioned. Wedding questions dried up. The absence said everything. Her mother reached out one last time, polite but restrained. She told me her daughter was struggling, that therapy was helping, that she wished things had gone differently. I told her I hoped her daughter found peace and that I genuinely meant it. And I did. I wasn't angry anymore. Anger requires energy, and I had redirected mine toward rebuilding. The deposits were officially gone, about $3,000 across vendors. When I wrote the final cancellation emails, I felt a brief pang of regret, not for the money, but for the version of life those deposits represented. Then I closed my laptop and went for a walk. Perspective has a way of showing up when you stop forcing it. $3,000 to walk away before vows, shared assets, and legal entanglement felt like a bargain. A painful one, but a fair one. Weeks passed. I settled into my studio, hung a few pictures, bought real furniture instead of makeshift solutions, started cooking again, exercising, sleeping through the night. The constant tension I'd been carrying dissolved slowly, like a muscle finally allowed to relax. I ran into her once, unexpectedly, at a grocery store. She was with someone new. I didn't recognize him. She saw me, froze for half a second, then looked away. I felt nothing. No jealousy, no resentment, just distance. That's how I knew I was past it. The most telling moment came when her ex, the one she'd always spoken about with that wistful tone, reached out to me through a professional networking site. His message was brief, respectful. He said he was sorry I'd gotten pulled into her unresolved issues, that she had done similar things with him. That validation through money had always been a pattern. I didn't ask for details, I didn't need them. It confirmed what my instincts had already pieced together. The consequences didn't punish her the way movies make you expect. There was no dramatic collapse, no public humiliation, just a quiet unraveling of the image she'd worked hard to maintain, replaced by the reality she now had to face. And as for me, I kept moving forward. Not loudly, not triumphantly, just steadily. 4 months have passed since I walked out of that restaurant and didn't look back. I'm still in the studio apartment, but it doesn't feel temporary anymore. It feels intentional. I'm saving again, this time for myself, for a future that isn't shaped by someone else's expectations or quiet tests. I've started looking at houses, not because I'm rushing toward anything, but because I finally trust my own timeline. The pain didn't disappear all at once. It faded in layers. First the shock, then the sadness, then the anger I didn't want to admit I felt. And finally, something calmer settled in. Clarity. I understand now that what happened that night wasn't about a $48 entree. It was about respect, about how someone treats you when they feel insecure, about whether they lift you up or push you down to feel taller. She didn't mean to destroy us, I believe that, but intent doesn't erase impact. And love, real love, doesn't come wrapped in comparison or humiliation. I learned something important about myself through all of this. I'm not afraid of being alone. I'm afraid of being small inside a relationship. And the moment I felt myself shrinking, the moment I felt like I needed to prove my worth with money or silence, something in me finally said no. That voice was quiet, but it was firm. I've been on a few dates since then. Nothing rushed, nothing dramatic, just conversations that feel easy. With one woman in particular, things felt different right away. When the check came, she reached for her card without hesitation. "I've got this one," she said. "You can get the next." Next. Not test, not proof, just mutual respect. When I took her to a nice restaurant later, my choice, because I wanted to, she ordered what she liked and didn't look at me for permission. I didn't glance at the price, not because I was trying to show anything, but because it didn't feel like a transaction. It felt normal. That's what I had been missing all along. Real respect doesn't need to be proven. It doesn't need to be tested. It doesn't whisper comparisons to hurt you into compliance. It just exists. The engagement ring is still in my sock drawer. I'll sell it eventually. For now, it's a reminder. not of what I lost, but of what I refused to accept. I don't regret leaving that restaurant. I don't regret choosing silence over argument. And I don't regret walking away when someone showed me they didn't value me the way I value myself. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do isn't staying and fixing. It's standing up, walking out, and trusting that your future will be lighter without the weight you were never meant to carry.